strength is a strong sense of reality. Now you may be wondering, well, the person that I know has a strong sense of reality, but it's not based in my reality. Exactly. And it is very strong. So I'm going to tell you a few stories that are part of my learning experience with real people. And what I found through these experiences is if I validate the feelings connected to that person's reality, we're going to find some common ground and be able to move forward together. At one point I knew a gentleman, and in his mind, he was 22. If I asked him, how old are you? He would have said, I guess about 22. And he was still a professional ball player. Now in my reality, he was 85 and he lived in our memory care community. So what we noticed happened is caregivers ended up calling me and saying, Maria, we've got a problem here. He's trying to have sex with us. Well, that could be a problem. So what I found is, as we kind of looked into this, investigated a little bit, is that women were helping him get into bed in the evening, and his type was petite women with brunette hair. So here's this lovely young woman, petite, long brown hair, and she's helping him get settled, getting his shoes off, helping him get into bed, and hair's flowing down. We had a social model of care, and part of how we executed that was that we didn't wear uniforms or scrubs. Instead, people wore their real clothing. So if you think about that, she was modest, but a little bit of the top of her chest may be showing as she leaned over him. 22-year-old baseball player, it may have felt very appropriate to him to pull her down on top of him. So it's not necessarily that his actions were inappropriate, they were appropriate for his understanding of the situation. So interestingly, with this man, what happened was a couple years later, when I came back and was a trainer for this group, what I heard was that a caregiver reported, she said, would go into his room and he would say, are you coming to bed? Instead of making a big deal about that, she would say, let me freshen up first. A couple hours later, she did his every 2-hour check, and he would say to her, how was I? He didn't remember that they didn't actually have relations. What he really needed out of that experience was to still feel like he was a man. She said to him, wonderful as always. Another story that connects with the strong sense of reality is of a gentleman we had in one of our communities. And he would actually take people and throw them on the ground. The interesting thing that helped us out a lot, understand where he was coming from, is he would yell, hit the deck, really loud. So, while we didn't want people throwing each other on the ground, of course, having those words, hit the deck, helped us understand where he was coming from. We looked into his history and we discovered that he had been on a Navy ship in World War II, probably bombs coming around and everything. And what we would notice is that prior to these hit the deck episodes, he would start crouching down, looking out the windows, kind of listening, look kind of suspicious. At that moment, if we tried to invite him for sing-along or donuts, he wouldn't have any part of that. In his mind, in his reality, he was on duty and doing a very good job of it. If we did all's well, while he was starting to crouch around, we could avoid the whole episode. And it simply looked like this. We discovered that there was an all's well captain on those Navy ships. None of us knew what that looked like, so we just made it up. And ours looked like this. on the Western Front. And we do that in all the 4 directions. Immediately, he would take a breath and relax. And at that point, we could say, hey, want to come have a cup of coffee? Or I have some donuts down here. And then he could relax and re-enter and be part of the group with us. Another story that connects with this, for me it was the most painful. We had a lady in one of our communities that had a very strong sense of reality, and it would look like this. She would come out of her apartment maybe 8 o'clock at night, and she would just be sobbing intensely. And she would say, come quick, come here, my babies, they're dead, come here, come quick. And we would go to her apartment where she would show us the dead babies on the floor. We couldn't see them. If at that moment we had tried to explain to her, oh, it's just your dementia, you're having hallucinations, that wouldn't have made any sense. She needed us to validate her feelings. She needed us to connect with her. What we would do is hold her, hug her. One of us would say, I'll stay with you, and then whoever the other caregiver is, Millie, is going to take care of arrangements. She'd say, okay. And she would just let us hug her. We'd rock. She'd sob. Our shirts would be wet. And finally, and it's hard for us not to cry in that moment too. Finally, she would let us take her to the couch where we'd continue to hold her till she really cried herself to sleep. We'd go ahead and help her lay down, get some pillows and blankets out of her room. We wouldn't make her go back into her apartment. She'd fall asleep like that. In the morning, she would wake up and say, how did I get out here on the couch? We didn't remind her. What we learned later was that when she was younger, she had the Rh negative factor and actually had 8 stillbirths. It's hard to even imagine. So what we know is that a lot of times people have repressed traumatic situations that start to bubble up to the surface. And it has to do with a concept called resolution. So she may have needed us to connect with her and help her validate her emotions to help do some of that resolution as she processed the end of her life.